Phone. If I'm lucky, we have with us Brendan James. He, of course, is the former Chapo Trap House producer and creator of the Blowback podcast. Brendan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. How you doing, Sam?
I am better now that I've actually got you on the phone. And you
Yeah,
actually,
me
you
too.
actually sound great.
Thanks. I've got my iPod headphones on, which is the state-of-the-art technology as far as I'm concerned.
Right, the earbuds?
Yeah, like with the microphone on the wire. That's I think
no, that's much better. That's much better.
Yeah.
The earbud, whatever the just the Bluetooth ones stink for this.
No. Oh, I don't mess around with those at all. No.
All right. Well, you sound great.
Thank you. You
And
too.
I appreciate you doing this.
Of course.
Well, we're at our tech is a little bit dicey. And
Sure.
I would have, yeah, but you're here, and
Yeah.
congratulations.
Oh, thanks. My tech is iffy too. I'm calling from a new house I just bought in the Berkshires. I cashed out on some stock in January from a little tip, maybe from a certain congressperson, and so I'm sort of doing a bit of a slapdash arrangement here myself.
Congratulations to you. That's
Thanks.
very exciting.
It has nothing to do with the current public health crisis. I just want to make that clear. The stocks were completely unrelated, and I'm innocent.
Okay.
Nothing in particular. We can move past it. Actually, forget it. Forget I said that.
I mean, you guys are pretty plugged in over there.
Yeah, definitely. But no, thank you. Yeah, the new podcast is exciting, and I'm glad you had me on to chat about it.
So let's talk about this new podcast, Blowback.
Yeah.
What the heck does that mean?
Well, Blowback's the CIA's term. There's a guy named Chalmers Johnson who wrote a bunch of books on it.
I interviewed Chalmers Johnson many times, actually, back in the old Majority Report. Yes, about that very topic.
Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, Blowback is a sort of umbrella term for unintended consequences that come about as a result of, in this context, U.S. foreign policy. That when we pursue our interests, or when we think we're pursuing our interests as an empire, we end up committing to things that come back and bite us in the ass in a big way. An example, one of the most popular examples, would be the idea of arming the Islamic militants in Afghanistan in the 80s to get one over on the Soviet Union, who we hated so much, and then watching them slowly mutate into both a mixture of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who then obviously came into a bit of a nasty conflict with America a couple years down the line. So we decided to name our show Blowback to take a look at different examples of this phenomenon.
So, all right. So, what are the different examples? I mean, how is this structured? Are you doing like almost like seasons, like a series of episodes on one particular period or something like that, or how does it work?
Well, this first season, this is a proof of concept, so we'll see if we even have a future after this one. Maybe it'll really stink, but we've done our first season on the Iraq War. That is the subject of this show. In this first run, it's a limited run of 10 episodes, and we just try to take. It's a little maybe overambitious. We try to take you from A to Z on the Iraq War, which I think is a pretty clear example of Blowback. I think most people vaguely know that we were a friend and ally of Saddam Hussein in the 80s. We actually uncovered that it was even earlier than that. But we then turned on him quite deliberately in the 90s, slapped some horrible sanctions on his country throughout the 90s under both the first Bush administration and the Clinton administration, which teed us up in 2003 to invade and point the finger at Saddam for maybe doing 9/11, but also having WMD and a bunch of cooked up intel. So this is obviously a journey in which we see musical chairs happen about who's our enemy, who's our friend, give weapons. We sold him anthrax. Next thing you know, we're accusing him of sending anthrax to the United States. After 9/11, it's a big mess, and we want to try and take it apart and see all the nasty stuff that we did, and that by the way that we still live with, and that still reverberates and shapes our reality today. I think is a big part of the show.
Do you guys get into like the Project for New American Century and all the neocons, or is it basically once we land there and it's all like Dan Senor and who was the first CPA guy? I can't remember now.
Well, there was a kind of a beta program named
Garner.
Jay Garner.
Yes.
Jay Garner, yeah.
And Garner was actually a decent guy, and that's why they got rid of him, I think, in a couple of months. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Well, I mean, he was a defense contractor goblin, in my opinion. He made his living off of designing Patriot missile targeting systems at that point. But yes, I mean, compared to his successor and a lot of the people around him, I would say he's more kind of just like Jack Lemmon in Glengarry Glen Ross.
Right.
He's kind of like a hapless old timer that they put out to pasture in a very weird choice to run Iraq for a little bit, because he saw that this was turning into a huge disaster and was not clear on why his calls for, this may ring true to people right now, why his calls for aid and billions of dollars needed for infrastructure to handle a crisis, why those were not being met, and was certainly more sympathetic in that regard. However, once he came back home, he basically went into hiding and hid from the press and from anyone in the Bush administration because he just didn't want to have to talk about it or be asked about how badly it might have gone. And when he did have a meeting with President Bush at the time, he said, "Yeah, everything's going great, actually. You guys are cleaning up over there. Good luck." And he didn't tell him any of the ingredients for a giant civil war that he saw brewing during his time. So we correct the record on Jay Garner a little bit, but compared to his successor, yes, he had a good head on his shoulders.
And so wait, so when does the podcast start? Like like temporarily, or is it
right?
Okay, so when does it start?
Our first episode is actually, we go back a bit. We try to give you this background context from the Cold War. So, we sort of tee you up to understand our long rap sheet over there. And so the first episode is a lot of that. We talk about a little bit the British colonialism, because we inherited Iraq as an imperial interest from the British. And we talk about Cold War politics. Iraq had a pretty vibrant communist party that was very popular and that was a really important part of the development of that country after they shook the British out in the 50s. And so they were a target for us. We helped the Ba'ath Party, Saddam's party, get into power. We team up with Saddam against Iran in the 80s, and that's where the first episode ends. Second episode is Gulf War, because I think you really have to understand how much we ravaged the country in the 90s. And then after that, the rest of the show takes up from 9/11 onward, and it's like the Iraq War proper. So we go back a ways in the first episode. But then after that, we take you to about ISIS in like 2014. That's where the show kind of puts a pin in the narrative.
And so how many episodes is that? And does this come out on a weekly basis, or can you binge listen?
I wish you could binge, but we have 10 episodes in total, and it's on Stitcher Premium. So it's going to be behind, the Stitcher Premium paywall for a while. Eventually, it'll be public. But if people want to sign up, I should say this now probably, it's pretty easy. Just go to StitcherPremium.com, and you can enter the code Blowback for a free month of listening. And there's 10 episodes that'll be coming out weekly.
So you can try it out. You can
try it out.
4 episodes and see if they're...
Precisely. And we have a free giveaway episode as well, actually, featuring, I believe, your buddy, John Benjamin, John Benjamin. And he plays Saddam Hussein in a little sketch I wrote at the very top of the episode. That's familiar. A teaser.
I am excited about Adomian.
Yes, Adomian plays George W. Bush. He was the only guy that I really trusted to play Bush.
Well, he was doing it back in the day, actually.
Yeah.
And I think we actually may have had him on our show, Janine and I, on the radio show as Bush.
Oh, that's great.
I think he called in at one point, and he was great. Now, that is very exciting to me. This other guy that you're talking about, I'm not sure I quite get.
Well, he's alt comedy. He's kind of anti-comedy, John. And I understand if he's not.
Yeah, I know what that means. Not funny.
Yeah. Well, people are going to have to tune in and listen. I would say give him a chance, but you've heard it here from Sam. Maybe fast forward past that guy. But once you do, our free episode just kind of situates people in it. We front load some of the funnier or more absurd trivia, but we try to provide some context about the rogues gallery of the Bush administration that we'll be spending our journey with, in the actual main 10 episodes. So for people out there, give the free episode a listen, but then to really hear the show proper, you got to sign up on Stitcher Premium.
There is a quality about what was going on there in terms of their staffing that is very similar to what we're seeing now in the Trump administration, right?
Oh, sure.
Right. It's just like we don't care how unqualified you are. We don't even look at qualifications. We look at loyalty, and we're going to send anybody we can find over there. I mean, we have right now the office in the administration that staffs all the federal workers is run by a 24-year-old with literally college seniors working for him.
Now, that's a great point. One thing, again, that we really want to hit home with the show is not to at all marginalize or play down the catastrophe that the Trump administration, as we're seeing more every day, as he would say, is shaping up to be. But there is a continuity between not only the policies and the conservative, agenda that's still being executed by the Trump administration, but the style. I mean, as you point out, not just in the administration at home, but particularly in the occupation of Iraq.
Yep.
The Bush administration famously redirected the applications to, for gophers wanting to work at the Heritage Foundation. And all these other ghoulish think tanks on the right, they were bypassed and went straight to the Office of Iraq Occupation in Baghdad.
This is the Coalition Provisional Authority, right? Is that what it was, the CPA?
Correct. The CPA, otherwise known as Can't Produce Anything or Children Playing as Adults, by people who were on the ground in Iraq, the CPA. And one reason it was called that was because you had people fresh out of college and right-wing ideologues, kids fresh out of college in particular, Republican henchmen's kids, designing the Iraqi traffic system and the Constitution. And there was one 24-year-old who single-handedly was put in charge of redesigning Iraq's stock market. And he became drunk with power and thought he was, creating the edifice for a whole new computerized system in the Middle East. Didn't end up happening. And in fact, all of this, the result was what you would expect from a bunch of insane neocon ideologues up top and a bunch of weird, horny college grads executing orders at the bottom.
One of the agendas of those people, if I remember correctly, and I think Naomi Klein wrote an amazing piece about this, and I remember talking to her about it, was Baghdad Year Zero, I think it was called. And it was basically this whole notion that they were that they perceive this as sort of like the libertarian conservative economic, sort of grand experiment, like we have
utopia.
Yes, like we're starting at a complete baseline, and we're just going to create a legit free market type of utopia, as you say.
Yeah.
And that did not go well.
No, it's one of the big blemishes on the record of those who wished to turn Iraq into that kind of paradise and realign the Middle East into an American, kind of federation of friendly states. The occupation, or rather the invasion, one of its main goals was, to construct a, obviously, first and foremost, friendly to America regime, but that meant opening up Iraq to the world market, obliterating any kind of state-run enterprises or subsidies that were, rationed to people in Iraq. Of course, most importantly, cracking open Iraq's oil industry to those giants like Exxon and Total Oil and other places like that. Now, they had a measure of success with that because there were a lot of, they did tear down. I didn't realize Naomi had a project referencing it as Year Zero. We call episode 6 about the occupation and Paul Bremer's CPA. We call it Year Zero. I should have done more homework. I didn't realize someone had already used that, but it was year zero, much like the Khmer Rouge tore down any possible edifice of the old society. We did that. But the director of economic development in Iraq, it was so called, this guy was someone who was happy in the chaos after the invasion that people were stealing state buses and vehicles and buildings because it was, as Marx would put it, primitive accumulation. It was the beginning of removing public assets from the state and putting them in entrepreneurs' hands. What a lot of other people saw as a horrifying chaos that we were enabling, they saw as the beginning of, a privatization program. And of course, there were all kinds of attempts to privatize Iraq's economy. Some were successful, some weren't. None produced any good for the people of Iraq. But the oil industry was never turned over to private hands. There was a law that was written by Bearing Point, the American consultancy. But the Iraqis never let them carry it out. So there were private partnerships that we tried to, shove in there, and Exxon and some of those other guys, they still wet their beaks. But it may never be the case that the invasion got what it really wanted out of that oil industry. So yeah, it's not to say in recounting all this that we did everything we wanted to do. Capital doesn't always pull off the job, but we certainly tried like hell.
Right. I mean, it's a lot. The level of incompetence. They can have a desire and break things. I mean, I think that there was multiple agendas, and
yes.
And give me your sense of because Paul Wolfowitz famously said, I think it was in a Senate hearing, weapons of mass destruction was one thing that we could all agree on.
Yeah.
But everybody who came to the table, a lot of these neocons like Wolfowitz and
Doug Feith.
Feith, but also Pearl.
Yep.
And Cheney. They all had, and there were others who all had their own sort of agenda and reason for doing it. Like the Project for a New American Century, I think, saw the geopolitical. Basically, they saw it as a bulwark against China and a way to sort of maintain the U.S. as a hyperpower.
Yes.
And allow these low-level conflicts to exist all around the world. And I think the idea was largely, in part, let's enrich our own multinational corporations. But I think even more importantly than that, I think the ultimate goal was an attempt to we control the spigot. We don't necessarily need the oil from there, but we just want to make sure that if China is in a position that they need the oil, that we can control the flow of oil so that we can dictate. It just gives us an economic and maybe a military, just sort of a power dynamic. And it's,
I couldn't have put it better because, in the show, it's largely, a narrative, but we do stop and try to analyze some of these moments. And for me, no blood for oil, perfectly good slogan during a rally. Absolutely nothing against that as a placard analysis. But ultimately, the idea of oil being so necessary to extract from the Middle East, that's actually an argument fabricated by those in power to justify these adventures when they know it's not really true. Of course, we get most of our oil from Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual point of it, as you just laid out perfectly, would be to control the spigot. It's about control rather than the per se
material
resource
gains.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's always been imperialism. And that's really the name of the game when you're talking about Iraq, just as if you were talking about the Raj in India or anywhere else. It's mostly about your leverage and your control. Part of that is just a negative mobilization against any potential great power rival or whatever, or regional, troublemaker that you see as the great I am. So yes. Now, as far as the different levels of ideology or motivation, I agree. We try to take some of that apart as well, because you had the neocons like Wolfowitz. These were the hyper, if you like, idealists who at least couched their project in terms of democracy spreading and all that stuff. I think that you could peel that away to see what you said about just wanting to retain superpower status. And in that sense, they fit like a glove with the agenda of the Cheneys and the Rumsfelds, who were a little bit less like proper neocons and more just like classic American imperial architects who wanted to maybe improve the system. Rumsfeld famously wanted to streamline the Defense Department, streamline our presence abroad. But the neocons were they had all the brainiacs in place to carry out that case. And then you had just kind of if you like, Jacksonian or whatever guys who were just American hyper patriots like John Bolton, who just want to blow anyone up, who looks like a threat, and who actually didn't have a whole lot of time for the nation building and the democracy building that the other guys talked a lot of highfalutin stuff about. We talk about the Project for New American Century, but did you ever, actually, you know what? I don't even know if we would go into it that much because we try to uncover these lesser known things. Did you ever hear about the Bletchley Park 2 operation in the Bush administration?
The Bletchley Park 2? No.
Yeah, this was I think Wolfowitz ran, and Bletchley Park, for those who don't know, it was the kind of brain trust that the British assembled in World War II. Alan Turing, it's where he cracked a lot of the Nazi codes, etc. And so, incredibly pretentiously, the Bush administration called this Bletchley Park 2 after 9/11. It was a brain trust formed of like Paul Wolfowitz and Fareed Zakaria's friends, who wanted to design, much along the lines of a New American Century type deal, the way forward. Do we hit Egypt? Do we hit Syria? Do we hit Iran? And we take a look at that, and they basically lay out that Iran is the main goal.
But they were saying Syria comes next, and then we go to Iran.
Yeah. It was basically Iraq is the weakest at this point because of the horrifying sanctions we imposed throughout the 90s. It was a tin pot dictatorship at that stage. Then Syria, then Iran. But they admit in this document, or in this, in this brain trust, this spitballing session, that Egypt and Saudi Arabia are the main sources of the terrorists that not only hit us on 9/11, but that more generally tend to crop up in the radical Islamist movement that had been present throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. But that basically you can't do anything about them. Oh, who knows? It's real messy, and we need to focus on places we can do something about, which is Iraq. And then eventually, of course, the grand neocon project that we still see today, in no small part due to the aftershocks of the Iraq War, is to take out Iran and the Islamic Republic, which is why we teamed up with Saddam in the first place in the 80s.
If I remember correctly, Rumsfeld at one point, I think it was Rumsfeld who said, like, yeah, we went after Iraq because it was like basically a soft target.
Yes.
And that so if you want to know where that mentality comes from, in terms of like gun control, it's just sort of like the idea is, oh, well, of course you go for the weakest member, regardless of as to whether there's any reason to do that.
Yes.
And I also should say that I think my analogy with the spigot was always like, you want to be at a party where your buddy is basically pumping the keg.
Yep.
And, you're not going to get all the beer, but whenever you want some, it's there. And if that jerk shows up at the party, and you don't want him to get any beer or her to get any beer.
If John Benjamin shows up at the
John
party.
Benjamin shows up and starts trying like a beer hog like he usually does, you can just tell the keg guy, like, knock it off.
Cut him off.
All right, so here's one more question for you. The billions of dollars that were in duffel bags that they took off, I think it was like some type of cargo plane. They literally started off with like just duffel bags of cash that they just handed out. And there was no accounting for it. There was no receipts. Did they ever even come up with a theory as to where all that money went?
As far as I know, I mean, there are pockets that you can see. It's likely they went. I mean, a lot of it went to honestly just paying off a bunch of militants. Some of it went to the black hole of corruption that existed in post-war Iraq. We still don't know where. I'm looking at an article. I pulled it up as you were speaking. The $17 billion that was earmarked for developing Iraq. Called the Development Fund of Iraq in 2004, $17 billion just gone. We still don't know where it is, and that's money that's owed to the Iraqis. No, we simply don't really know. And a big part of the show that I'll add that we want to get into, it's a lot like Chapo. I know you've had the Chapo guys on. If people were familiar with them, we strike, I hope, a similar tone. We try to have the lowbrow and the highbrow. We try to have the absurd and funny mixed with the tragic and horrifying. And so in the show, we think of it as like a Coen Brothers or Safdie brothers retelling of the Iraq War, where we want to talk about all the corruption and all of the real skeezy. I mean, Ahmed Chalabi, a lot of the Bush people. These are characters straight out of one of those movies, and disappearing money.
Curveball? Do you get
Curveball? Yeah. And Chalabi's guys in particular, he was, for people who don't know yet, until you listen to Blowback, now available on Stitcher Premium, he was a classic flim-flammer who was a big part of fabricating intelligence to get us in. He had personally declared himself Saddam's nemesis for a long time. Once he's in there, he becomes fat on all these kickbacks, and he basically becomes a Scorsese character. He transformed into a heavy, and his thugs would steal armored cars that were carrying money from one bank to another within Iraq, never seen again. There's a great book I just want to plug by R.M. Roston. He's a Reuters reporter now. He wrote a great book called The Man Who Pushed America to War, and it's about Chalabi. And that Chalabi story alone is an amazing and endless story of how you can not only change world history but get rich quick and make friends in the process. So yeah, we want to dig into all that stuff, but as to where the money really went, I still think no one really knows.
Well, it sounds fascinating, and I can't wait to listen. Except for that part with the guy from Archer, I just don't. I don't get that show.
No, me neither. It was we were throwing him a bone,
Well, it was nice of you. It was nice of you to do that.
Thanks.
Brendan James, the show is Blowback. You can find it on Stitcher Premium. And if you use the code Blowback, is that it? You get a month free?
Yep.
All right. Well, folks can check that out. Brendan, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Stay healthy and stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.